So President Biden is making his way through South Korea as he begins a strategically crucial trip to visit allies across the region. And this comes as South Korea's new leader faces new threats from the north. And Americans' relationship with China is expected to be high on the agenda as well. So CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes is traveling with the president, and she's joining us now from Seoul. Nancy, thanks so much for joining us, because it's clearly not morning where you are. President Biden landed in Seoul. I thought it was interesting that he headed to a semiconductor factory. Can you tell us why this was the first stop? Is it an attempt to sort of underline the trade relationship, or is there sort of something else going on?
That was definitely one of the goals, Anne Marie, to show how strong the U.S. economic relationship is with South Korea. He headed to a semiconductor plant here in Seoul, a Samsung plant. And the reason he chose that particular plant is because Samsung has already announced it's building essentially a replica, a very similar plant in Texas, in the United States. And so he wants to tout that relationship, especially when it comes to semiconductors, because not only are they so key to all kinds of technology, cars, computers, cell phones, but they've really been in short supply throughout the pandemic, as you know, to the point where Congress is actually debating a law, the CHIPS Act, that would pour more money into developing more semiconductors on the home front in the U.S. And so for all of those reasons, President Biden wanted to highlight that particular factory. And then tomorrow he sits down for a bilateral discussion in earnest with the new South Korean president, who just started the job about 10 days ago.
So we know the former administration pulled the U.S. out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And so President Biden is seeking to sort of establish a new economic framework with allies there, but it's not going to be the same as the trade agreement that was there before. So I have a kind of a two-part question. You know, what sort of economic framework are we talking about? And will it be enough to combat the growing influence of China?
Right. The Japanese in particular have made no bones about the fact that they wish that the U.S. would return to the TPP framework. There were so many benefits for both countries. But in the absence of that agreement, they are glad that the president is coming here to Asia and really making this economic framework, this economic agreement, the centerpiece of his diplomatic visit. And what this economic framework would do would be to improve supply chains between the U.S. and its allies here in the Indo-Pacific. It would also enhance labor and environmental standards among all of these allies. And it would essentially just establish a stronger economic presence for the U.S. here in the region. And of course, the reason that the Biden administration is so intent on doing this is because it wants to compete with China, and it wants to send a message to China that it is teaming up with all of these U.S. allies that border on China to basically not only try to compete with China economically, but also to send a message to China as it conducts some of its own military provocations in the South China Sea and elsewhere.
So that was going to be my next question. How is China reacting with the awareness that, you know, the point of this is to sort of diminish their influence in the region? And what about North Korea? Increasingly, we're seeing more missile tests there.
Right. So China never reacts favorably when the U.S. looks to bolster its relationships here in the region. In fact, when the Quad was first formed in the early 2000s, that's this group of four allies, the U.S., Australia, India, and Japan. The president will be meeting with all of those leaders in Japan in a couple of days. China, reacted very negatively, called it Asian NATO, and accused the U.S. of trying to bully the Chinese, essentially. And so they're unlikely to look very favorably upon these new moves. As far as North Korea is concerned, that is an interesting heightened security situation that the White House is watching very closely. You have U.S. intelligence and South Korean intelligence both predicting that North Korea could test a nuclear weapon in the next couple of days while the president is here in the region. His aides say that they're in very close contact with allies watching this situation unfold. They say that they'll be ready for it. But in the meantime, the president no longer has any plans to visit the DMZ, the demilitarized zone between South and North Korea.
All right, Nancy, thank you.
You're welcome.